Before the sun rises over Thunder Bay, the temperature has already dropped to -19. The dock lights cast long yellow lines across the frozen surface of Lake Superior. Somewhere beneath the ice, the water is still moving. A hull, dark, massive and cold, sits against the terminal. Steam rises from the exhaust stacks. The engines have not stopped. This is a Seaway class bulk carrier. She measures 222 meters from bow to stern. Her beam is 23 meters wide. Fully loaded, she sits nearly 9 meters below the waterline. She was built to move cargo, not quickly, but consistently, in volumes that smaller vessels cannot attempt. Canada's interior grain system depends on vessels like this one. Prairie wheat, grown across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, is transported by rail to Thunder Bay. Here it enters the grain elevators. From the elevators it moves into the holds of ships. From the ships it reaches the world. The loading process begins before the crew has eaten breakfast. The conveyor belts inside the terminal run continuously. Grain falls from the spout into the open hold at a rate of approximately 1,500 tons per hour. The sound, dry, constant, almost like rainfall, fills the interior of the ship. A bulk carrier operating on the Great Lakes must account for the St. Lawrence Seaway lock dimensions. The maximum permitted length for vessels transiting the Seaway is 225.5 meters. Beam cannot exceed 23.8 meters. These constraints shape every vessel built for this system. They are not arbitrary. They define what can move. The St. Lawrence Seaway opens in late March and closes in late December. During those weeks of closure, ice accumulates across the system. Vessels that remain operating must be ice-strengthened. Hull plating is thicker at the waterline. Time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than frames are reinforced. Propellers are designed to operate in slush and brash ice without damage. Steel moves through a different system. The ports of Hamilton and Nanticoke on Lake Ontario receive iron ore from Labrador. The ore is smelted. The finished steel is loaded back onto bulk carriers. It moves north to construction sites, rail manufacturers and pipeline contractors across northern Canada. Inside the wheelhouse, the pilot studies the ice report transmitted from the Canadian Coast Guard. The latest survey shows 12 centimeters of new ice forming along the northern shore passage. At this thickness, the vessel can proceed. At 20 centimeters, they would request icebreaker escort. The main engine produces 9,000 horsepower. At full ahead, the vessel maintains a service speed of 14 knots in open water. Through early ice, speed drops to 8. Through consolidated pack ice requiring escort, 4 knots is acceptable. Fuel consumption adjusts accordingly. Each knot costs more in ice than in open water. The crew numbers 22. On a vessel this size, that figure is lean. Automation handles much of what once, though, required more hands. Engine monitoring, ballast control, hatch sequencing, all managed through integrated systems. What remains for the crew is watchkeeping, maintenance and judgment. The hatches are numbered 1 through 7. Each covers a separate cargo hold. The hatch covers are hydraulic. They open and close in sequence. During loading at Thunder Bay, each hold receives a specific tonnage to maintain trim. Improper distribution creates list, which creates stress on the hull. Precision here is structural. Iron ore from Labrador's Carroll Lake mine travels over 2,000 kilometers. Time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than to reach the steel mills on Lake Ontario. The ore is loaded at Arles, Quebec, one of the largest iron ore shipping terminals in the world. Ships depart at 12-hour intervals when production is running at full capacity. The temperature in February reaches -23 degrees Celsius. Wind from the north adds significant chill factor. The ore freezes in the stockpile. Reclaimer machines break the frozen ore apart before it enters the conveyor system. Without this step, the conveyors stall. When fully loaded with iron ore, a Seaway class vessel carries approximately 27,000 tons of cargo. At that displacement, she draws nearly 9 meters of water. The minimum channel depth in the Seaway is 8.2 meters. The margin is narrow. Tidal windows, freshwater levels, and cargo weight are calculated precisely before departure. The grain voyage from Thunder Bay to the port of Quebec takes approximately 4 days under normal conditions. The crew works in rotation, 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off. Navigation, engine monitoring, and deck inspections. Time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than run without pause. The ship does not stop for weather unless conditions become dangerous. At the port of Quebec, grain is transferred to ocean-going vessels, Panamax and Capesize bulk carriers that cannot transit the Seaway. These ships load here and depart for Europe, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. The wheat that grew in Saskatchewan may eventually feed cities that have never seen the prairie. Winter navigation on the St. Lawrence requires regular icebreaker support from the Canadian Coast Guard. The CGS Martha L. Black and vessels of the Gulf class operate continuous circuits. Time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than keeping the commercial shipping lanes passable. Without this support, the bulk carrier fleet could not maintain schedule. Behind the icebreaker, the bulk carrier follows in the broken channel. The ice has been fractured but not removed. Jagged pieces press against the hull. The sound inside the ship changes. Metallic scraping. Low groaning from the bow frames. The crew on watch listens but does not stop. Steel coils destined for northern construction projects carry different handling requirements from grain. They cannot be loaded loose. Each coil weighs between 15 and 30 tons. They are positioned by crane. Time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than with exact spacing. Too close, and the rolling motion at sea causes them to shift. A shifted load at sea becomes dangerous. The Great Lakes Fleet operates under a different regulatory framework than ocean-going vessels. Canadian flag lakers must be crewed by Canadian licensed officers. Maintenance standards are governed by Transport Canada, which conducts regular inspections at major ports. The fleet is aging. Many vessels are over 40 years old, yet continue to operate within certification. In the off-season, vessels undergo dry dock maintenance in facilities at Port Weller and Collingwood. The hull is cleaned, inspected for stress cracks, and recoated. Propellers are removed and examined. It is work that takes weeks and cannot be rushed. The ship must be ready before the Seaway opens again. Not all bulk traffic moves through the Seaway. On the west coast, Vancouver's Roberts Bank terminal handles bulk grain exported to Pacific markets. Here the ships are larger. Panamax and post-Panamax vessels too wide for any lock system. They load and depart directly into the Pacific. Asia receives the next harvest. The crew preparing to depart Roberts Bank knows this voyage will cross the North Pacific. Winter. Weather in the Gulf of Alaska produces significant swells to soar regularly 8 to 12 meters. The bulk carrier's stabilizers are passive. She will roll. Cargo must be secured. The hatches must hold. Nothing can be left unsecured. Returning to Lake Superior, the season is advancing. The ice is thickening. Wind speeds along the northern shore regularly exceeds 60 kilometers per hour in January. The vessel's anemometer records continuous gusts. Inside the wheelhouse, the pilot adjusts course slightly to reduce beam sea impact. Small corrections, continuous judgment. A bulk carrier running in ballast without cargo handles differently than when loaded. She sits higher in the water. Wind catches more surface area. She responds more aggressively to wave patterns. The crew knows this. Empty passages require different vigilance than loaded ones. The sea does not change. Only the ship's response to it changes. The cook on a laker works in a galley designed for constant motion, magnetic pot holders, non-slip mats across every surface. The menu rotates on a fixed schedule. Meals are served in 2 seatings because the watch rotation means the crew never eats at the same time. Food is functional. It sustains concentration. Grain dust is a concern aboard bulk carriers during loading and unloading. At certain concentrations, it becomes combustible. Ventilation is managed carefully in the holds during cargo operations. Crew members near the hatches wear respiratory protection. It is unglamorous work, the kind that must be done without error. The navigation officer plots course corrections at the chart table. Though satellite navigation has replaced paper charts for primary use, paper charts remain aboard as backup. The regulations require it. In the event of a total electronics failure, time equals 200 milliseconds / greater than in remote Canadian waters. And it has happened. Those charts are what remains. Approaching the Welland Canal, the bypass connecting Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, a vessel must slow to 5 kilometers per hour. The canal is 43.4 kilometers long. There are 8 locks. Transit time averages 11 hours. For a vessel carrying 25,000 tons of cargo, 11 hours through a concrete channel is routine. It happens dozens of times each season. The season's final voyage before the Seaway closes is different from all the others. The crew knows it. The terminal workers know it. When the last lock at St. Lambert closes for the year, the commercial shipping channel freezes within weeks. There is pressure to complete final deliveries. Nothing is left waiting until spring if it can be moved now. The canal system was not built for comfort. It was built for tonnage. Each year, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence system moves approximately 50 million tons of cargo: iron ore, grain, coal, limestone, steel. These numbers do not appear in most discussions of Canadian trade, but they underpin it entirely. At midnight, the mate on watch climbs to the bridge wing despite the cold. Time equals 300 milliseconds / greater than -17, wind from the northwest at 40 knots. He checks the radar, checks the ice reports, and looks out across the dark water. The instruments give data. His eyes give context. Both are necessary. The anchor is rarely dropped on a laker. Most ports have berths, but in fog, and fog on the Great Lakes arrives without warning, anchoring in a designated area is safer than continuing blind. The anchor chain on a vessel this size runs to 12 shackles. Each shackle is 27.5 meters of chain. The anchor itself weighs over 5 tons. As the cargo is discharged at Hamilton, ore coming out through clamshell grabs onto the dock conveyor. The ship physically rises in the water. The waterline changes. The hull, compressed under the weight of tens of thousands of tons, begins to expand again. Steel breathes. The process takes hours. The port of Churchill, Manitoba, on Hudson Bay, operates for only a few months each year before ice closes the channel. Grain from the western prairies can move north to Churchill rather than east to Thunder Bay. When the Churchill corridor is open, it offers a shorter route to European markets. When it closes, it disappears entirely. The chief engineers log records every mechanical event: a worn bearing on the starboard shaft, a valve replacement in the ballast system, an alarm on the fuel purifier at 0340 hours. These entries are not dramatic. They are evidence of continuous maintenance, the only reason the vessel is still running. The St. Lawrence River narrows at Quebec City. Ocean swells give way to river current. Salinity drops, the water becomes fresh. A vessel transitioning from salt water to fresh water changes her waterline slightly. Fresh water is less dense. Ballast is adjusted. The pilot knows this. It is corrected without announcement. The vessel approaches the final lock of the season. The pilot speaks briefly with the lock superintendent by radio. Confirmation of dimensions, confirmation of draft, confirmation of cargo. The lock gates open. The ship enters. When the gates close behind her, this particular transit is complete. Another number added to the season's total. By the time the grain reaches its destination, whether a mill in Belgium or a port warehouse in Morocco, the vessel that carried it is already returning. Empty, riding high, heading back west through the system. The prairie does not wait. The next harvest is already being planned. The ships must be ready when it arrives. The ice will return. It always does. The locks will close, the channels will freeze, and the bulk carriers will wait in layup yards until March. But the demand does not pause. The steel mills will need ore. The mills abroad will need grain. When the Seaway opens again, the first vessel through will not be celebrated. It will simply begin. Another season of cargo moving through cold water, through narrow locks, across great distances, quietly, consistently, without ceremony. This is how Canada's interior reaches the world.